Dear listeners, welcome to our last podcast of the 5th Symposium of Illustration. Today I am joined by Maria Surducan, our expat resident. Hello Maria.
Hello, and thank you so much for the invitation.
We're really happy to have you here. I noticed when I was going through our messages that we first met at Fetila Bede in Brussels.
Yes, I think it was 2015.
That's a long time. But ever since I've been seeing you online, we've been e-meeting for a very long time. And then I realized I was probably very consistently mistaking you for your sister, Ileana.
It happens, yes, it does happen a lot.
From what I've understood, you two had somewhat a similar beginning. Can you talk a bit how you got into illustration?
Yeah, this is an interesting story because I think all children draw, and I think this isn't something special about illustrators. What happens later is that at some point children stop drawing, either because they haven't been encouraged enough or because they find a different passion. Now, what happened with me and my sister was a sort of competition for appraisal, I would say, because I started the drawing and she would start, we were at the same small table, I was in front of her, she would be drawing very strange figures, their head downwards and their leg upwards, and then we realized she was copying my drawings. But she's a lot more determined than me, and whether I would get lazy and stop drawing, she would finish her drawing and get praise. And since I sort of wanted the same thing, I started finishing my drawings, and it became like a competition where we would try to one-up each other, but in a very friendly way. And also it turned into a storytelling competition. And sort of, I think the storytelling was bigger than the drawings, because we would continue to make up stories at the dinner table, and we were like making theater, like playing a movie for ourselves. So I think our love for illustration and for comics is based on our love for storytelling. Because we often think if we wouldn't be doing illustration, we would probably be doing game design.
It sounds like you were both very good at compensating each other's vices.
Yes, and also since we lived in the same room for a very long time, we sort of got in tune. Obviously, we would fight as children and we would fight as teenagers, but all our fights were superficial. I think the baseline is that we understand each other quite well, and we obviously have different interests, but we are very good at giving each other feedback. And I think in a solitary work like illustration, having someone you trust honestly tell you that you can definitely do better, or that that wolf looks like a cheese grater.
That's what she told you?
Yes, and it was during a live stream. So yeah, it's sort of we helped each other a lot. And I think it's not necessarily an influence in style, but it's definitely an influence in the way in which we perceive the world.
Because I noticed that when you have two people who are close together, it can be siblings, it can be good friends, it can be even romantic partners, their styles tend to kind of mesh, and people start mistaking them for each other.
I think sometimes this is assumed, and for example, there's the French couple Carasquet. I don't think they mind being mistaken one for each other. They work as a team and they sign together. I'm not so precious about style. I'm not very attached to style, which might be a problem because I feel like every project is done in a slightly different style, but I think styles are like languages. The goal isn't to have a style, the goal is to tell a story. And if a different language works better than the one you used yesterday, then sure, go for a new style, like experiment. And because it's you doing it, all your styles are going to have something in common because you are the central unit and you are doing the translation.
Yeah. So you don't get offended. You don't feel like you have enough of your own identity, then it sometimes gets mistaken with your sisters.
No, I don't mind, because there's people who have met me in a context when I was not accompanied by my sister, especially in advertising, because I do a lot of advertising work, and I don't think my work gets mistaken for hers there. Also, I think in comics her style is a bit more French than mine, so I don't mind if people mistake us one for the other. I'm sure that if we collaborate, they will get to differentiate us. But I think the goal is to produce good stories. And in 2019, we worked together. It was our first project for real together, like North Summer's Break, which was a comic book for children published in Romania. And it was the first time we were both signing a book together. And we said, okay, this is the end. They're never going to be able to tell us apart. That's it. And I know there was a journalist in Romania who... She was sent to do an interview with the Surducan sisters, and she was like, "There's two of them?" So yeah, I just think it's funny, and yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me of two Czech comics artists, Zuzana and Kateřina Čupovi.
Oh yeah,
They're also sisters, and their style at one point was very similar. Now I can see very clear differences, but every year they do a calendar.
Yeah, I bought the calendar.
It's amazing. So, how would you define your style? We've talked a bit about the influences. You said Ileana is more into the French side. So, what would be the definition of your style, but also your approach, even when it comes to storytelling?
Well, this is a good question. I think there are a few artists in my background which really influenced me. One of them is Val Munteanu. He's a Romanian illustrator. He was active before the revolution, and he has quite a distinct style which fascinated me as a child. Then there's Livia Rus, was an illustrator from Cluj-Napoca, and she did really colorful, really detailed images. My first memory, I think, is a book illustrated by her. When I was so little, I didn't even realize there was someone creating the illustrations. For me, like, the illustration was magic in a book. So I think it marked me profoundly. Then there's Lorenzo Mattotti, who is an Italian artist who's been around for a very long time, and I think is quite influential across the whole European illustration sphere. And then in the comics field, I learned French at the French Institute, and I learned French with the Schtroumpfs, because every second word is Schtroumpf, so it's quite easy to understand. And then I discovered Johan Svar, who's quite, well, at the time was quite an alternative approach to comics. Yeah. So I think that sort of gave me a lot of freedom, and I really loved what he did in the Rabbi's Cat. So the Rabbi's Cat, I think. I don't know what the English translation is. Le Chat du Rabbin. It's in French.
Yeah, I think the Rabbi's Cat is the English version.
Mm-hmm. So I think there's a lot of influences from other artists, but also there is my own personal interests and also my own personal history. Because, for example, it took me very long to realize that the background of my childhood, which were communist block of flats, quite grey, were seeping into my work. And I was even told at some point at the fair in Bologna that this makes it not commercially viable for the West. And I was like, why? And they were like, because it's depressing. I was like, it's not depressing. Oh, wait.
Yeah. I also done a few comics just about this kind of architecture, and it's just so normal to me, but I can imagine it might not be relatable for Westerners.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah. And also, I'm quite influenced by mythology, by fairy tales and legends. I think 10 years ago I would have called them Romanian fairy tales and legends, but in the meantime I've been doing a lot of research and I would say they're Eastern European, and quite often some of them are Western fairy tales but retold through an Eastern European lens, because it's very interesting the way in which fairy tales travel and the way in which motifs change, and the way in which the final goal of a fairy tale changes depending on the region. Because like in Chinese fairy tale, the goal is passing your exams, so the fairy will come to you and give you the correct solution to the exams, and like Eastern European is marriage. So it's really quite interesting. So yeah, I sort of think I've been quite interested in the therapeutical value of fairy tales, and in the way people gather in a place like during winter and start telling fairy tales about how winter isn't going to last forever, and eventually the prince, which is the sun, will kiss the princess, which is the nature, and she will wake up, and the way in which this doesn't work anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And if you retell this story in a context where people don't fear winter anymore, it becomes something else, and you start talking about the place of a woman in the structure of the story and the place of the man in the structure of the story, and building expectations and subverting expectations. So I think it's quite a generous playing field.
Yeah, especially because in the last year some of the legends, some of the folklore has been kind of, I don't want to say exploited, let's say it was mined out. For example, the Scandinavian folklore, it found its way to movies and comics books.
So did the Polish folklore.
Yes.
With the Witcher series. So, but the good thing is you can mine it forever, because you're not just retelling the stories, you're making them your own. And you're often telling stories about yourself and telling stories about your community through fairy tales and through illustration. And what finally unites us all, it's our fear of death. So bottom line, all stories are about this, and about vanquishing death, and about tricking death, and about pretending to choose death so that you have made the choice, you are in control. This is what Cinderella, for example, is about. And this is what King Lear is about. And it's very interesting because King Lear and Cinderella are actually the same story, if you strip all the decoration.
Yeah, so yeah, looked at it that way, but so would you say that's your goal when you're using legends in your work? Is it to make and find kind of these timeless points in those old tales?
Yes, it's like to find the red line and to extract it, and then to present it in new clothes, and to sort of retell the story. And I don't really care if you recognize the fairy tale, I know it's there. And I think some people will recognize it, some people will take it as a new story. The goal is to offer some sort of healing through emotion.
Yeah, and to continue with the tradition in like a new way that's maybe more useful.
Yes, yes, because we are a new generation. Every generation has a different set of problems, and it's interesting to see. Because, for example, Snow White was about the evil stepmother, but now Snow White is about smartphones and Instagram and the obsession with being the most beautiful. And like every generation is going to read it in a new way and need something else out of the story. And occasionally we make new stories, yes, of course. But the red line will still be there. They're going to be about the same things. Because we are finally people.
I noticed you had this line in your profile, and that's that you believe that images are in a way more accurate than words. Can you explain that a bit?
Yeah, I think like words and language, spoken words aren't actually very good at translating emotion. Because I find, for example, describing a sunset is never going to work. There's this thing where you're not in love and love songs don't make sense. They're like incredibly generic. And then you fall in love and suddenly the love songs are about you. Or you break up and that breakup song is so about you, it's so specific. So I think words on their own don't really help us. They're good for like very efficient communication, but if we want to delve deeper into emotions, then you need something a bit more abstract, something which allows you to bring yourself into the artwork. Because I think all the artworks belong half to the artist and half to the public. And I think this is with fine art you can get away with a lot. And you can say you don't understand me. But with comics, for example, if they don't understand you, then it doesn't work, then you failed. Because comics are meant to be read by a wider audience. So I think images allow you to transmit your message not more imprecisely than words, but more emotionally satisfying, more emotionally accurate. Because I think images are what brings you emotion. Now, the trick is to get the public to look at the image. Because unfortunately, we are assaulted by images all the time. And we've sort of learned to tune out commercials and learned to tune out unimportant information just when you're walking down the road. And then you have a specific receptors for warnings and for the really important stuff and for the battery is low. And you have to ask people to come into your story and you have to promise them it's going to be worth it. And then you have to make it worth it. So I think this is a very interesting balance you have to keep as a storyteller.
That's what I've always found fascinating about comics. It's how fast you can read them, how much information you can cram into somebody's eye sockets just through the images.
Yes, and it's very interesting to meet people who have the patience to actually read comics. Because I often find myself just going very fast the first time and just going for the story and then reading again and looking like at the technical stuff. But there are also people who have a very profound reading and who feel emotions just for the way the panels are juxtaposed. And it's very hard but very useful to learn to direct these emotions. So this is what I find so interesting about comics. Also, the truth is, I would like to make movies, but you need a lot of money and a lot of people. Like, you can't be the actor and the musician, you can't be everything. With comics, you can do everything. It's gonna take you 5 years, and it's gonna be read in half an hour, but you will be able to tell your story.
Yeah, I always say that comics is the best medium for people who want to do movies, but do not want to work in a team.
Exactly, yes.
So let's move a bit to the professional side of comics illustration and your work in general. It's been quite a short while. You've been in Bologna for the Children's Book Fair. It was 2 weeks ago?
2 weeks ago.
So how was it? What advantages do you think it brought you?
Bologna was overwhelming. I was invited by the Romanian Ministry of Culture. So I was at the Romanian stand, but I had a lot of time to go and attend meetings, and I tried to set up meetings with publishers and with literary agents beforehand. I used to go to Bologna quite often after I finished university, and I found that it was a different experience then than it was now. Because then in Bologna they have a lot of conferences which are quite useful for young illustrators, conferences on contracts, on rights, on getting your foot into the industry, on working with clients. And now, because I am older and hopefully wiser, I know all this, I understand all this. My specific questions are more elaborate and are more on the lines of what are we going to do about artificial intelligence? Because we can't pretend it's not here, it's here to stay, but how can we make the process ethical? And how can we ensure that if our images are used for data mining, we are remunerated? So it's like a different discussion, and it's more complex, and it has no easy answers. And it's also at the moment a bit scary, a bit depressing, but also there's a lot of hope because European illustration agencies and associations are organizing. So yeah, but this requires changing the actual copyright law. So you're sort of older and looking at a higher mountain to climb. But also the advantage now in Bologna is that I come with books which are already made. Because although Bologna is quite useful for illustrators, and while the exhibitions are like a treasure trove, you see the trends in European illustration and you see the best illustrators, Bologna is a rights sale festival. Like the main objective of the editors present there isn't to find illustrator, it's to sell and buy books. So it's quite helpful if you have a project, if you have a published book, I was there presenting like 5 of my books and 2 of Ileana's books and saying, would you be interested in this? And let's talk about this. And with Nor's summer break, for example, because Nor is quite a Eastern European specific story, I would say, because it has 4 children as the main protagonists, and it's never mentioned explicitly, but it's quite clear that they are all from different ethnic backgrounds. And this is quite specific to Eastern Europe, this mix of culture and this. I mean, when I was a kid, I used to play with kids who spoke a second language, and that Romanian wasn't their maternal language.
Yeah, also when like people say diversity, it's very different in states and very different.
Yes.
Even Romania and Czech Republic, the diversity looks very different.
Looks different, and it has to be acknowledged, and it has to be done in like a. This is normality. This isn't something exceptional. You don't get points for including diversity in your works. So yes, I was like from a different standpoint now in Bologna. And for the first time, I got the courage to actually write to people beforehand and try to arrange meetings. And yeah, it worked quite well. I know I'm not the best illustrator I can be. Hopefully there's room for growth. But I'm quite confident in my work. And if somebody tells me we don't like this, we don't need it, then I am okay, thank you very much. It's just a question of being a good fit for an editor. It's not a question of my work not being good enough. So at least I have this sort of confidence in my work. And I also have the ability to search the publishers which would be a good fit, which would be interesting in what I do. Now, of course, you talk with people in Bologna and it ends with, let's send me an email, send me a PDF, and then it will take another 2 or 3 months because publishing isn't very fast moving if we're talking about book publishing. But I got back from Bologna really hopeful.
And do you have any tips for people who are thinking about approaching publishers in this way, how to communicate with them, what to say, what not to say?
Yes, you have to learn to sell yourself. And you have to learn to speak about your work, not as someone who knows exactly what it's about. You know the concept of elevator pitch? If you only have like 30 seconds with the publisher who's like publishing house you love and where you would like to get a job, you have 30 seconds. What do you say about your book? Because you can't say, I make a book, I think it's really nice. And you can't say, I've been working on it for 5 years. And you can't say, this is my first comic book. You have to sell it. And you have to sort of develop like a different frame of mind where you're not the artist and you're not the writer. Because as writers and as artists, we tend to downplay what we do. And we tend to see the flaws, and you tend to say, I worked on that for 5 years, but now I could do it better. Oh God, this is your internal, like, this is your kitchen. You get out of the kitchen and you put you clean, you put your suit on, and you're thinking, how do I make this person give me their attention? How do I convince a publisher, but also the public, to stop from all the madness that's going around, put down the phone and come into my world? What's the selling point? What's the familiar? What's the unfamiliar? How do they work together? What's the conflict and why would people? And you also have to have a manufacture confidence. And I think you manufacture confidence. You just imagine you've paid a very good actor to play you in front of the publisher. Because I found that helps.
It's kind of like if you as the author don't think your work is interesting, then how can you persuade people to think the same?
Yeah, and I think like deep down you think it's interesting. But we've been taught there's like, it's not exactly shyness, but it's like you feel you're not allowed to go in front of the audience and say, I am the best, I'm a genius, this is great. But you should occasionally do this. And you should occasionally hear yourself say this just for the feeling of it. And then of course you have to deliver content, because the best pitch in the world isn't going to help you if your book isn't good. I mean, I'm assuming you've done the work. And I'm assuming everything is finished, and I'm assuming you're assembling a presentation. And then we get into the actually practical stuff where you send the pitch and it's like, I don't know, 10 pages PDFs with the with your pitch, which should be the interesting bit, the synopsis, which should be a detailed presentation where you also give spoilers so that the publisher would know how the book ends and how they could market it. If you know your target audience, and you should know your target audience, I mean, is it for children, is it for young adults, is it for adults, put that in as well. Short description of characters and a short paragraph about yourself where you tell them how awesome you are and how many awards you got, and if you've got no awards, what was your work, what you've done in the last 10 years. And this was quite surprising to me, because I found myself writing my presentation and writing my CV and realizing I did a lot of stuff, but I wouldn't have considered it important stuff. Meaning I built a comics community in my city, and we've organized events, and we've organized an online comics academy. This was with the support of the German Cultural Center and Goethe Institute. And all this is important. Like, tell people what your passions are. I mean, obviously your passions related to comics. And tell them what you can do and prove that you can keep a deadline and fulfill your promises. But do it like, really look at your work and present it seriously. Like, and also look at other illustrators online, because you read their presentation and you get all envious, and then you say, wait a minute, I could write the same thing. I mean, I also did that. I also have like 3 published books. I also have this and that. It's just that, say it out loud. Because you know you did it, and people who follow you on Instagram have seen your stories, but Instagram is not reality.
Yeah, and the more you say it, the real it kind of becomes. And also, when someone asks you, you will not be like and you just have something to say.
You have a list, and you can go through your list, and you can adapt your list from publisher to publisher and from client to client, because book publishers aren't going to care you worked in advertising. But people in advertising are going to be quite interested in what you did. So like, you're like a Swiss knife.
Yeah. Well, contrary to the popular belief that most artists, illustrators just work at home behind the desk, you travel a lot with your work. You do residencies, you were part of Comics Art Europe project. So what's your approach to this? Is this something you actively approach?
Yes, I think in the last 4 years, I've been actively looking for opportunities to like leave my environment, because an important part of creativity is that stuff has to get in order for stuff to get out. So you have to access different sources, and just a computer isn't going to help you. Even if obviously I watch animation movies and I watch series and I tell myself this is documentation, you also need first-hand experience. And you need to get out of, not necessarily your comfort zone, but get out of your usual environment, find new people, ask questions, but also find new opportunities to showcase your work. I think this is what I'm interested most in with the residencies, is taking my work out of its usual context and presenting it differently. Because I was really the process for Comic Art Europe, where I created a live drone concert, where I sort of composed the story and then sent it to Julien Limon, who did the music. This was a completely different project, and this is like, it's not publishing, it's not advertising, it's not fine art, it's something in the middle. And it's very interesting to say as an illustrator, I am going on tour with my concert. So I think, yeah, and also this is how you get new ideas, because the concert turned into a card deck, and the concert will now turn into an art book.
Yeah, it opened different doors.
Yes, and it's an incredible way to get funding for your own personal projects, because obviously your personal self seeps into commercial projects and they are your projects, but it's good to have the time to like discover what you want to say and sort of find your message in a very authentic way, and find what's your message apart from like the first sentence that comes to mind, which is usually, because it's word and it's a sentence, quite banal. Find your deeper meaning. And obviously this changes. It's going to be different in 3 years' time. You're going to be someone new. But it's good to have this respite to investigate it. And I think this is what, for example, Comics Art Europe did for me. This is what the residency in Brumov does for me. It's like it's not like real life. It's like entering like a different world and finding inspiration there.
Yeah. We've talked a lot how to get your work abroad, for example, the residencies. One of the more common ways, for example, in the States, is to have an agent.
Mm-hmm.
This is very uncommon here in Czech Republic. The industry is not big enough for the agents to exist, and if they do, they are definitely doing prose, not comics.
Yes.
But you
have
an agent.
I have an illustration agent, Maria Bogade, and she was an illustrator. We met in Bologna for coffees, because she posted on her Behance that she's coming to Bologna, and I wrote to her. And then 2 years later, she opened an illustration agency. But this is, let's say, different than a literary agent. Her work doesn't really focus on selling rights. I think I've got introduced to the world of selling rights due to the fact that both me and Ileana, we've started publishing in France before we published in Romania. So you learn quite quickly that you have to pay attention to contracts and see who has the rights for the book. And in the event where you want to publish it in Romania, who would the publisher speak with? Is it you? Is it the French publisher? What does this mean? Because often when you sign all your rights to a publisher, this means they will take care of the contract. And this, theoretically at least, means they will be looking for deals, for foreign right deals. But if you only have one book and you have a very big publisher, they're not going to spend time on you. They don't physically have this time. So you're going to have to learn to look for opportunities, and you're going to have to learn to be very careful with contracts. Because I have books where I own the rights, and I have books where the publisher owns the rights. And I have some book deals where the publisher owns the rights, but I'm free to seek foreign publishers. And my original publisher fee isn't so great, but they do take care of the contracts and the financial side of things, and they make sure we get paid. It's good to be sort of part of an organization. Mm-hmm. And this is something I looked for in Bologna. And I spoke with 2 literary agents, and I think in about 6 months I'll be able to see what comes out of it. I got sent a contract this morning. I didn't have time to read it. But yeah, I mean, just talking with someone and just someone saying, yes, we love your work, isn't enough. Then comes the hard part, where you actually get a contract and you read the contract and you decide if that contract works for you. I didn't really have in my life the experience of meeting evil people, but I've read contracts which did not suit me, which were not something I was interested in. They would have been a great deal for a different illustrator, but you sort of have to know what your end goal is, even if your end goal changes every 5 years. It's absolutely normal.
Yeah, I'd say especially with comics, getting language mutations is the best thing that can happen to you, because you can spend up to 3-5 years on a comic book.
Yeah.
It is never paid by the original publisher, it's not enough.
No, this is not how comics works, yeah.
But you are having a Czech translation.
Yes!
Which I'm afraid is not gonna deal very much money, because it always depends on the size of the market, which in Czech Republic is not bad, but it's no France, let's be honest.
It's no France, and even France is in the States, so...
I'm gonna say how you got this specific deal, because I have my fingers in it. We've talked with Maria about our books, and we ended up exchanging contacts to the publishers we know, and this turned out to be a really good idea for both of us.
Yes, and I think this is very important. Illustrators and comic artists talk to each other, just be friendly online. It's not complicated, and also it's so helpful. Because I've got links for residencies and suggestions where to apply for funding, just because other illustrators had already gone through the process, and they were I don't know if it's something specific to the illustration community or the comics community, but I find people are quite generous. Mostly because there's not a lot of us, and I think there are a lot of opportunities, and you don't always have the time, or the opportunities don't always fit you. So I hate it when I have to say to clients, I can't do this. I would rather say, I can't do this, but here's 3 people who would be able to do it and who are good at keeping deadlines, and here's their online portfolios. It makes me feel better, and I think it builds my relationship with that client, and it builds my relationship with other illustrators. So, yeah, that's how we got our book deals, fingers crossed.
So that might be a tip, for other people. Just be active and friendly online. And it ended up with my book Hairless getting a contract with Ileana, which is amazing, the French publisher. And for you, of course, you're going to be published by Meander Publishing House with Norse Summer. We've talked about this a bit during your talk about Romanian illustration, which is up online on our Facebook. Be sure to check that out. But let's go through it again, because it's a wonderful book, and I will happily listen to the story one more time.
So, Norse Summer Break is the story of Norbert, who is contemplating the perfect summer holiday. He's going to spend it in his room, playing computer games, but unfortunately his parents betray him and take him away to his grandparents in the mountains. Nor describes it as the absolute wilderness where the cows are going to eat him. He gets there, and his grandfather is a weather wizard, his grandmother is the witch of the forest, and Nor is totally not impressed and not interested in continuing the family tradition. But what Nor actually lacks in his life is friends, and what he discovers in the village is other children his own age, and they reluctantly become friends, and this develops into a beautiful friendship based on the games they play together. Because I don't think computer games are bad. I think children need fantasy and children need storytelling, but I also think children have the capacity to learn and put storytelling into their own lives. So they play a lot of games in real life, they meet a lot of fantastic creatures, and of course an ogre steals the sun, and the 4 children are the only ones who can save the world. And by the end of the story, you never know what is real and what is not real, but you get the feeling that for them fantasy is quite real and quite palpable. But also it's mostly a story about friendship and about how our friends help us reach our full potential.
How long is the book?
The book is 96 pages.
96 pages. Full color.
Full color, yes. We worked together, me and Ileana, on the script. Then Ileana did the drawings and I did the colors. And it's quite useful to have someone who works in a style quite similar to yours and who understands your work process. because it goes twice as fast, and I sort of envy the Americans who have like a script writer, a storyboarder, a penciler, an inker, and a colorist, because I would imagine that goes quite fast. On the other side, that's a very fast industry. So
how long did it take for you to finish the book?
So I think it took us, it was 6 months for the script and for the first 10 pages, which made our pitch. And then we pitched it to the different publishers, and one of the biggest publishers in Romania accepted it. And then it took us, this was in March, and the book was published late October. So it took us about another 6 months, but we had the full storyboard already. So it was just a question of sitting in our studios and inking and coloring. And I think we were doing it to the rhythm of 2 pages a day.
That's really good. That's fast.
Yes, because it took me 2 days to color a page, and I thought this can't be it. There must be a easier way. And I was listening to podcasts, and someone mentioned being a flatterer before being a comics author. And I thought, what? And I Googled it, and I found Kurt Michael Russell's courses on YouTube. I couldn't believe that you could find all that information for free, but it like blew my mind, and it took the time down to 4 hours per comic page if I do the flats as well. But happily, the flats is something you can externalize. Mm-hmm. So we had a friend who we paid because it's work, and who helped us with the flats for about half the book. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
Talking about the pay, and now I of course don't want you to talk specifically about your projects, but I think it's really important for the comics industry to share the real numbers. Mm-hmm. For example, here in Czech Republic, I'd say that the average page rate is around 50 euros when it comes to,
the advance. This is the advance.
No, it's what the artist gets, like 50 euros per page.
But then you get royalties.
And then the author of the text gets royalties.
What, only the author?
Yes, it's divided.
That.
If you're both, you get both.
Yes.
But if it's a team, then the artist gets like money, and the author of the text gets percentage, royalties.
Oh, that's interesting, because I get percentage as an illustrator as well.
Ah, okay.
So I get paid in advance, and then I get paid royalties. First, they recuperate the advance, but then I start being paid again, even as an artist. So if you're a team of writer and illustrator, normally, like the best deal I ever saw, which was with a French publisher, was 13%.
That's really good.
Yeah, but that was understood to be a really good deal. Normally, it's 10, 12. If you can negotiate 12, you're brilliant. If you negotiate 10, I think that's around the industry standard. And you divide it half-half, so it's 6%. I mean, you can discuss this and negotiate, because sometimes the script isn't so much work and isn't that complex. It depends how detailed the script is. Because if you only get like 2 pages of text and you also have to adapt it to a comics format, obviously it's not going to be 50-50. And for example, I did a book with Ono Bensity where I was the script writer and she was doing the drawings. And I think our percentage there were 40% to me and 60% to her. So yeah, it depends. You sort of decide this together as a team. And then normally there's an advance, which is split down the same percentages between writer and illustrator. It's not very big. It's not, at least in Romania, it's not 50 euros per page. It's less than that. But you recuperate it later from royalties. Hopefully the book sells. Because the problem with royalties, it's like it's a bet. You don't know if the book is going to sell.
Yeah, and it's a long-term kind of investment.
It's a long-term investment, but if you sort of engineer your book so that it would sell, and if you're lucky that your plan works, then it means that each year you would get a sum of money and hopefully the book will never go out of print. This is like an ideal scenario.
So you pile up the books and the money hopefully
yes,
piles up.
Hopefully that's your pension plan. But yeah, we sort of joke with my illustrator friends that we're never getting a pension plan because I think we're never going to be able to stop.
Yeah, I think that's the reality. Well, I think we could talk like this for ages, but I need to cut it short. I have just one last question, and that's what do you think of Bromov? How do you like it here?
Oh, I love it. It's like I have the feeling of being in a movie and sort of not believing my eyes when I go down the road from the monastery to the studio, because it looks so cute and you sort of expect characters from a movie to pass along, and then I turned around and there was a stork passing in the sky, and I think it's incredible because it's so different from my normal environment. And it looks almost theatrical because it's a Baroque monastery. It was conceived to be theatrical. So I think, yeah, I love it really much. It's my first visit to the Czech Republic, and it's quite impressive.
It's really good to hear. So be sure to check the talk about Romanian illustration and keep your eyes peeled for Norse Summer that will come out hopefully this year at Meander Publishing. Maria, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Ostatní díly podcastu z Kláštera, ve kterých rezidenti mluví o své práci, svých koníčkách a o tom, co je inspiruje, poslouchejte buď na YouTube nebo na Soundcloudu, kde nás najdete jako Czech Illustrators, nebo na Facebooku Sympozium ilustrace.